topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Welcome to Entrepreneurs Ascending, where we believe in a better life through better business. Here, we help you aspire to greatness, achieve your goals, and ascend to new heights. Whether you're starting, scaling, or exiting, we're here to empower you with inspiring stories, enlightening discussions, and transformative resources to help you accelerate your success. Now, it's time for Entrepreneurs Ascending. Welcome. Now is time for Entrepreneurs Ascending. Now is time for you to hopefully get some great information that is going to transform how you approach your business and help you to be able to go from startup to scaling up to a successful exit. And whether or not that's the legacy that you've built for your family and you're so proud to be able to pass that on to your children, or whether or not it's being able to sell it for the 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 figures or whatever it might be that you've always dreamed of to set yourself up for the rest of your life and maybe create some generational wealth. We're here to support you through that. And one of these areas that are kind of easy to ignore or maybe even just think that we've got taken care of is that those risks that we have to being able to scale and grow and succeed, especially when it comes to our data, our information. We think that maybe we check with the IT guy and, the backups are running. And so it's probably good to go. We use maybe a OneDrive, and so the stuff's on our computer is probably fine. It's probably synced to the cloud, but really, like, we need as business owners to better understand the value of our data, the risks to that information, and how that could potentially affect our business so we can make better decisions about ensuring that it's done right and then it's going to be there if and when you need it. So we're fortunate to have our guest Chris Marshall with us here today. He has actually a patent on a specific type of system, so he'll hopefully maybe even be able to share a little bit about that patent process with us today. But we're going to bring him in, and we're going to talk about those risks and ramifications of data loss. So don't go anywhere. We're going to bring Chris in right now. Chris, welcome. Thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having me, Matt. I'm looking forward to this.
Oh man, we're looking forward to it as well. And as you know, I've got a little bit of a background in IT, and I really value what you're going to be discussing us today, and I hope that entrepreneurs who are out there listening today learn to value it as well. So,
Absolutely.
So Chris, before we get too deep into the details of things, I'm just kind of a little bit curious. It's interesting because you have a patent on your technology. Is this a patent that you've had for like decades, or is it something that's a little bit more recent for you?
Thanks for asking. I invented a backup technology 3 years ago, and I submitted that for a patent in the fall of 21, and I got the patent. It's a full U.S. patent in the spring of 22. And we're currently pursuing that same patent in the EU.
Man, I think that's fantastic. So many people probably think that like the only patents that are left in technology have to deal with maybe AI or something like that, and because that that's the hot button topic these days. And but that's amazing that you just a few years ago were able to file a specific patent for something like backup technology. So congratulations on that. And
Thank you.
We'll talk more about that. But so Chris, tell me a little bit about when you first got that entrepreneurial bug. Like, when did you really realize that like you wanted to build a business and grow it yourself?
Well, I mean, I'm 58, so it depends on how long you have. We could go back. Um, Honestly, I think in seventh grade, I entered a contest. It was a bowl-a-thon contest to raise money for some charity. I have no idea what it was. And the prize you got was not based on your bowling score, which was helpful because mine was not. I think I bowled 220 total across 3 games. But the prize was for how many sponsors you have. And I went to every house in my neighborhood and then in the neighborhood next to mine, and I had like 120 people sponsor me. And so I won a little black and white TV, back like the 9-inch. But that was sort of when I realized that have a dream and have a focus and go after it, and you can accomplish just about anything. So that was the early days.
That was the early days whenever you knew like you could achieve something more if you put your mind to it.
Yeah.
And I guess a little bit about that persuasiveness or maybe that ability to sell. Did you have a little bit of the sales person bug at that point in time as well?
Well, I got better as I went,
Hmm.
but it wasn't a hard sell. I'm raising money for such and such charity. Would you like to support me? Pledge a few dollars or a total for the number of points I get or whatever. Just about everybody, if a kid has the gumption to come to their door, will do something.
Sure, sure, sure. So how did that grow and blossom to the business that you have today?
Well, it's interesting. So in 1993, I had been doing some computer consulting for large companies in town and got to the end of my contract, met a couple of people who needed help and started doing consulting on my own. So, I would go to their office and upgrade their hard drive or add memory or, whatever you did back in the day, and then count my hours and send them a bill. So it started in 1993, and that sort of morphed into a programming business. So I don't run around changing out hard drives and things like this now, but I write software for companies to run more efficiently. So that's sort of my longest standing business because I've done it now for 30 years. Um, but it was an experience I had in that business, and I'm still doing that, but an experience there where I had some clients lose data, and I realized we need to help these guys and have something set up for backups. So that led to creation of a second company just focused on data backups
And a patent, right?
and a patent. So I put an idea together in the summer of 2020. So this was my COVID baby, and ran it by a bunch of techie friends to see if they knew of anybody that was doing it. Nobody had heard of anybody else doing what I was specifically doing. And so I hired an attorney to do a search. And he searched 120 million patents in a bunch of countries, and nobody had registered my idea. So not Microsoft, not Carbonite, not Veeam, not any of the big backup companies that you would think of
Wow.
had registered the idea. And that gave me some encouragement because, Microsoft, these guys and gals are so smart. Like if they think of something on their way into work, they have a patent application on it by noon. So the fact that nobody had ever uh, specifically put those pieces together encouraged me. And then I hired a phenomenal patent attorney who took care of the rest.
Wow. Wow. Okay. And so what is that patent on?
So I specifically back up people's databases. And when I say that, I'm talking about an inventory database, a payroll database, maybe a stock trading database, maybe a construction management database. So I'm really interested in when a customer has a large pile of data, maybe an ERP, CRM, to use lingo that we have. I'm not as worried about an Excel spreadsheet because if you have a spreadsheet, you can email it to yourself. You can throw it on a flash drive. If you have a payroll system for 350 employees, you can't put that on a flash drive to protect it. And so you have to do something else. What I realized, like I said, two of my clients had a big data loss, And I realized the owner had no idea if their backups were working or not. And it turned out one was, because I had set that up in the past, and one was not because somebody else was responsible for it. So my patent is around two things: testing every backup every day, which is novel in the industry, to make sure that it can restore. Okay, and then
Yeah.
testing to make sure that it's current data. And
Wow.
there's a reason I can explain why I do that. But did the backup work? And the only way to know if a backup worked is to restore it, to reconstitute it back to the original. And then is the data current? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think so to me. I mean, of course, I've had, like I said, a little bit of a background in this, so
Yeah.
I kind of understand it. But, you know, just kind of taking a quick step back on it, though, because, a lot of people think, well, my IT guy handles this. I probably don't
Yeah.
need to listen to the rest of this episode. But I caution you for a second, and I'm sure Chris cautioned you as well, because I think there's some really key points he said there
Mhm.
about verifying it on a daily basis, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. So first of all, what's the actual risk here that we're talking about for a small business owner, a medium-sized business owner,
Mhm.
for that data loss? Like, what kind of impact might that, or I mean, what kind of statistics are there for the possibility of even happening to them?
Oh, there's some great statistics. So there's a large backup company called Veeam.
Hmm.
They did a study 2 years ago, and they talked to CIOs of major companies. They determined that 58% of all backups fail to recover. And
Wow.
again, when it comes to backing up, it's not backing up, it's can you get that data back in a crisis? So
Hmm.
if if more than half of all backups fail to recover, that puts us in a vulnerable position. FEMA did a study, and FEMA has a lot of experience in disaster. They perhaps rain and storm and flood disaster, but that happens to businesses. They determined that if a business is unable to access their core data for 10 days or more, 90% of those companies will be out of business in a year.
Wow.
So
So 10,
it's
10
you have
days
this
means
thing
90% of the businesses are,
10
or 90% of
days.
those businesses are out. Wow. That's powerful. That's
Yeah, and the,
powerful.
the
So
10
good.
days, the 10 days is an interesting setting. Right. Yeah. I'll just finish that. So, it doesn't mean that you're out of business for 10 days and then the lights come on day 11. If you have a disaster such that your backups don't get you back within a couple of weeks, they're not going to get you back. And that's where that 90% comes from. So we have this 90% failure rate, and half of all backups don't recover. And to me, that was a problem that needed to be solved.
So how often are backups typically tested to make sure that, what you backed up you can get that back out,
Mhm.
right? Like, how often do they typically do that?
Sure. Well, have you heard of HIPAA? It's a security standard. There's another security standard called SOC 2, and a lot of companies go through these standards to make sure that they're compliant with good data habits and good security habits. So HIPAA and SOC 2 require you to test your backup once a year. So that one time every 12 months, you have to take that backup image and reconstitute it to the original form and then make sure everything's good.
So just once a year is what the
Yeah.
requirements are for HIPAA and SOC 2. Some of the anybody who, or any of those industries that applies to, when you hear those names, you know that those are the bodies that you have to subscribe to. But
Mhm.
um and so you typically look at to them as those standards that you need to follow. But
Yeah.
once a year, I mean, if you're doing daily backups, that means that there's what, 364 potential backups that might not work. And if you're looking at the 50% rate, I mean, that about half of those probably you're not going to be able to recover, right?
Yeah. And let's change settings for a minute. You sit
Okay.
down on an airplane It's today, August 16th, and you decide you're going to fly to Chicago to see your family or to see the Cardinals beat the Cubs or whatever. And the pilot gets on and says, hey, I just want everybody to know we last tested the engines on this plane last September. We did our annual once a year test, and now it's August of the next year. Like, everybody would get off the plane. We would not accept an annual test there. We would not, every time you get in your car checks your brakes. That means every day, sometimes multiple times a day, if we're in and out, our brakes are being tested by the computer in our car. And we would not accept a once a year brake test. And yet here we are with a once a year data test, and the odds of loss are high enough and the catastrophe rate is high enough that once a year doesn't make any sense to me.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, because if you're putting information into a database, and I mean, oftentimes, I mean, that's you're putting in a lot of information. Depending on the size of your company, I mean, that's a lot
Mhm.
of information that you could lose if the backup from the past week didn't work, or the past month, or the past 6 months, or maybe even back to all the way last year. That's a potential huge amount of information that you might lose
Mhm.
about, the nature of sales, and your clients' information, and and it's potentially a risk too. Like, there are certain types of hacking, right?
Mm.
What is it? Ransomware. That's what I'm trying to get at. Ransomware,
Yep.
where it's not even just the loss of the data itself, right? It's that with
Yeah.
ransomware, oftentimes they'll require you to pay tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars or more to get
Mm.
your data back. And sometimes they give it to you, sometimes they don't. So there's going to be a financial loss even directly from that, right?
Well, absolutely. So everybody heard about the Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack a couple of years ago. And Colonial ended up paying $5 million to get their data back. So they got a password that gave them access to their information again. So when you see something like that, you know that they didn't have a good backup. I mean, simply put, or they would have bought a new computer that was virus free, put all the backup information on it, and flipped off the ransomware folks. So when you see I mean, that can wipe a company out, even if you have cyber insurance, right? What you don't need is a payout from your insurance company. What you need is your data so that you can continue your business. Can I tell you a
Right.
quick story about the testing part? So
Yes.
um, thank you. I have a client who called me in. They got a virus. It wasn't ransomware. It erased every file on every hard drive in their whole
Uh,
office. And they had a payroll system for 350 employees, and they had some people doing their backups. So I discovered that their payroll had not backed up in 9 months. So this was April, and they didn't have payroll records past the prior August. And in the state of Illinois, you're required to have complete payroll records in case they need to audit something, or there's a union dispute. So I set up a special software for them. They brought their senior management in to make 42,000 manual payroll entries to get caught up. And they were getting a happy email from their backup provider every day saying everything's good, but nobody was testing.
hmm And so that's where the patent comes into place, right?
Right.
That because you do that daily test. So
Right.
you actually spin that backup on a up. You spin the backup up on
Mhm.
a daily basis to make sure
Right.
that everyone works.
Correct. So again, I spin it up, and the fact that I can restore it means it's restorable. So now we know that if your company goes out tomorrow, or fire or flood, I mean, I had a company lose their server due to a lightning strike, and I had set up this same backup 5 years prior, and we got them up and running in very short order. But there's 100 ways to lose your data. And what was I going to say?
So you're saying that there's 100 ways to lose your data. There's lots of different ways to lose your data, and
Right.
you were able to get it back really quickly after that lightning storm, right?
Yeah, because I had a separate tested copy. And so we do a full test, and then we make sure the data is current so that no company will ever be 9 months out of date. So for instance, you would get a payroll if you were my customer, and you're welcome to be my customer. I'll sign you up after this show. But the message would say, "Dear Matt, we received your payroll database. Today is August 16th. We see data through August 15th. So that is a verified backup. We know it restores because we restored it, and we know it's current because we date checked it." And that's what the patent was for.
Okay. Okay. So I'm just curious if you might share a little bit. I know you got a patent attorney who they first did the research on the patent to make sure that there was nothing competing out there. But like as an entrepreneur, as the business owner, like what did you have to be able to like prepare to like what was your level of work? What things did you have to do to be able to get it ready for the patent attorney?
So there were two attorneys. One did the search, and we did a couple of interviews by phone. This guy was in New Jersey or something. Did a couple of interviews, and I described the process in great detail. And then based
Mhm.
on that, he searched. And then he came back and said, "Hey," he was really surprised. He said, "Nobody's got this." And so that's when we kicked it over to the second attorney, and I described step by step, like how it worked. So, if you think of, you know, I recently started cooking chocolate chip cookies. They're delicious, right? But there's a recipe and you have to go step by step. So, my wife would go cook cookies and she would just dump everything in the bowl and know all the right proportions and she would go. But I have to read like step 1, open the chocolate chips. Step 2, pour the chocolate chips. That kind of thing. So I gave the second attorney the recipe for what I'm doing every day because at that point my business was already running and I already had paying customers. So I just walked him through the steps. I didn't send him the program code because that would cause him to fall asleep. But I just detailed like every little thing I was doing. And then for the patent application, he took that and he would take step 2, pour the chocolate chips in the bowl, and he would make that into 4 steps. Tilt
Yeah.
the bag at a 45-degree angle, watch the chips begin to fall. But in a patent, you have to be really specific. And then the other thing is the patent, they always try to make it as broad as possible. So it is a little bit broader than my specific use, but that gives me additional protection if somebody tries to imitate it.
Okay. Okay. So so from
And
your
then,
side, go ahead.
no, I was going to say, you have 2 options when you file a patent in the US. You can file it normal speed, and you
Mhm.
get your approval or disapproval in 2 to 3 years, or you can pay like $2,000 more and file it expedited, and you get your approval or disapproval in 6 months. And
Oh,
so
okay.
I thought, I am building my business on this intellectual property. Why would this is not the place to save $2,000. And
Right.
literally from initial filing to approval, it was 6 months. And there was some back and forth with the patent examiner, who first thought she had found other people doing what I'm doing. And then my attorney kind of explained the distinctions. And she said,
Mhm.
"Oh." And like 2 weeks later, we had the approval.
See, I was curious about that. Like, how much pushback did you get along the way from the patent attorney office? Because a lot of it seems like it's a gap where people probably think that they're okay, but
Mhm.
or that they're kind of doing it, but they're not obviously. So
Yeah.
it was
Well,
actually pretty easy to explain to them like what the big difference was, so that you could get the patent moving along.
it was. And the good thing about having an
Okay.
attorney who specializes in this stuff. Like, I got a notice from the patent office saying, hey, we're rejecting your application because we've got
Mhm.
these two people that we think are doing the same thing. And, the patent off, even though we hired somebody to search, the patent office still has the final say.
Mm.
And so my attorney picked up the phone and called the examiner and set up a time to chat with her like a week later. And they talked through it, and he answered her objections without me having to do anything.
Wow.
So this is why you get
Yeah.
a good attorney. Quick shout out. So the largest law firm in St. Louis is Bryan Cave, and they represented me for the patent.
Okay. All right.
Yeah,
Well, great job, Brian Cave. Great job.
yeah.
Let's give him a round of
And
applause.
that was a positive experience. It might have taken me multiple years, and I don't know if I ever would have gotten it doing it myself.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's great having somebody who's knowledgeable, right? I mean, that's just the whole thing about having somebody who's knowledgeable in that space, being able to do what you can't, right? I mean, everybody
Right.
being able to play into their strengths. It's kind of like that hiring somebody smarter than you. Well, everybody's smarter. Everybody's kind of got their zone of genius, right?
Yeah.
And so that's a powerful testament to that, I think. So if somebody doesn't necessarily get these things into place, right? They think that they've got their
Mm.
their backups. They're getting a happy little email each day, and
Mhm.
they find out, or let's say they have the data loss. What are the steps that they typically would need to go through to recover?
Well, it really depends on the situation. So,
Mhm,
like I said, I had a client whose server was hit by lightning. And it was a stock trading company, and that was their stock trading server. So at that point, they weren't making any trades.
mhm,
So um, the other complicating factor was when this all happened, their IT guy, who normally did their backups, had just gotten on a plane for Costa Rica.
mm,
And so they didn't have their primary line of defense. They called me, and I was their second line of defense, and we got them up and running very quickly. So
mhm,
things I encourage people to think about is having a second line of defense, right?
mhm,
Or having a redundant process. So if I were to ask you, you have a parking brake in your car. It's not exciting, but there's like a multi-billion-dollar market for making parking brakes. And if you hit a rock and it cuts your brake line, you can stop the car with a parking brake, right?
mhm.
So that thing's not exciting, but nobody would buy a car without it.
Yeah, you can't just Fred
Uh,
Flintstone it, just stick your
you
feet
can't
down
Fred
and
Flintstone it. Right.
no, it doesn't work.
That's a funny image. Uh, we talk about airplanes. A commercial airplane can land on one engine. I'm not even talking about the guy that landed in the Hudson River, but that thing was designed by Boeing or Airbus or whatever to have that redundancy built in. So we insist on redundancy. We insist on a second line of defense. And then we have a $50 million company, and we hire somebody, either internal or outsourced, to set up our backups. But that may be a single line of defense where if something goes wrong with that process, we have no backup. And so what verified backups is a second line of defense. All of my customers already had a backup before they started working with me, and they still have that. But now they have a second line of defense, and they've just upped their odds of a recovery. So,
Mhm,
back to your question, what the company would need to do would be based on what their loss was, if they have any workable backups, and how do they get to those.
mhm. Yeah, so I want somebody to think about, like, the importance of their data. Like, so if you are a business owner, all of your records for payroll and all of your records for, your client records, maybe even your data metrics, or your marketing
Mhm.
metrics, whatever information that you have and whatever, reporting systems that you use. I'm thinking about the importance of your data. I mean, in a lot of ways, like, your data is kind of like the lifeblood of the business, just in terms
Right.
of being able to communicate what's going on. And then if you want to sell your company, let's say, even if you're planning on selling, being able to have that, I mean, you have to have that data for the company that's going to be buying your company. They want to see, they want to know, like, what is your special sauce? They want to know why your company is as valuable as it is. And if, for some reason, especially at that point, you're in the middle of that, let's say, an acquisition, especially
Mhm.
then too, like, if you also lose that information, and that you become a huge risk. So
Right.
if you're a business broker out there, you might want to even, talk to Chris and say, hey, you know what? Actually, I'm a business broker, and I'm gonna start connecting all my clients to you, because we have to minimize all of those potential
Mm.
catastrophes during that process as well. So just another way of thinking about it, because again, Entrepreneurs Ascending is
Yeah.
about startups to scaling up to successful exits. And I think all along the way, you got to take your data, the safety, the security, um, of and the
Mhm.
the veracity of your data seriously, right, Chris?
Well, absolutely. Imagine you lose your accounting system and suddenly you don't know who you have to pay and you don't know who owes you money. Like
Mhm.
that can shut you down and it shouldn't be.
Right, right, absolutely, absolutely. Well, thank you, Chris. I really appreciate having you here today. If somebody wants to get a hold of you, how can they reach out?
So, easiest way is email Chris at verifiedbackups.com. Chris at verifiedbackups.com. Shoot me an email. We'll set up a Zoom and we'll talk about your situation. And if you don't need more backups, then you don't need them. And if you do, you owe it to your employees and yourself to be covered. So we'll figure out where you are and go from there.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again, Chris. And if you are a business owner or a business leader who are working on scaling your business, taking it to the next level, please continue listening. We are here each Monday at 4 p.m. Central, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we would love to have you on. And feel free to engage with us as well. If we can't get to your comments in the show, we will try to get back to your comments afterwards. Also, you can reach out to me with any questions at matt@timeforsuccess.io. We'll see you again soon. Thanks. Thank you for being with us today. But now is the time to put what we talked about into practice. Remember, your family, employees, and community are depending on you to rise up and win. The great news is you're not alone. You're part of a resurgence of entrepreneurs who are ready to take their business, life, and impact to the next level, and we're going to do it together. This show is powered by Time for Success, where we help business owners every day who want more freedom and wealth while building a legacy of positive impact. Please follow Time for Success on LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube for more helpful strategies and tools for creating the business and life of your dreams.